Hey, Dr. Joe here at Atlas Health, and today is day 12 of 100 videos, 100 days. I'd like to talk about chronic pain today, and really excited this weekend I get a chance to be part of a great lineup of speakers at the California Chiropractic Association annual meeting symposium, and I'll be speaking on the topic of how a food sensitivity can contribute to chronic pain and how hormones can relate to food sensitivities, right? So here's the situation, right? We have this country right now that's in the midst of a massive opioid crisis. And a lot of this kicked off because of people that are in chronic pain. And so right now your options if you have chronic pain are to take over-the-counter pain medication or to go to a doctor and get something stronger, right? Basically that's your options. And then if you had an accident or an injury, you might need a surgery to recover from that, or you might do PT, or you might see a chiropractor, you might see an acupuncturist, you might enter the alternative medicine field and hope that they can help you reset from the injury. And often that works really well, right? And then you have another population that never had an injury, right? In the absence of trauma, the body will break down from the inside out. And so like they have chronic neck pain, or they have chronic wrist pain, or they have chronic knee pain. There was really no specific injury that they could identify that caused it, yet they're not doing very well. And in some of those cases, they've tried PT, they've tried chiropractic, they've tried pain medicine, and they're not getting any lasting changes anywhere. So I just wanted to share some information with you that you can get some conversations going with your clinician if this happens to be you. And so one thing that really shows up a lot in people that have chronic issues, either an injury that never fully resolved or they just had an insidious onset of some sort of pain issue, is when I talk to them, they have a history of digestive issues or some sort of like mucus production after food, or they have a known food sensitivity that is unresolved. And so the mechanism of that is when a person eats a food protein, like say they have like, the common one's gluten, right? So they'll eat gluten and then it goes into the stomach. It doesn't digest all the way down. The thing about gluten is that it's resilient to our digestive acid secretions, and some people actually more so than others, right? And so the gluten doesn't break down into its constituents. So instead of having like individual chunks of amino acid floating around after digestion, they're just still stuck together. So think of like instead of bricks floating around, there's a wall floating around down there in the intestines. And so the immune system, instead of seeing an amino acid that our body uses as a building block for a tissue, the body will see this glob of protein and it's like, okay, this is a problem. So what ends up happening is this glob of protein ends up becoming subject to an inflammatory reaction from the immune system. That's like the long and short of it. That's the short story, okay? But basically this creates a This may not respond to a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like ibuprofen or aspirin. By definition, a non-steroidal affects a different pathway of pain. Okay, so steroids, that was easy to say. Steroids actually affect the immune system. By dampening the immune system, it lowers inflammation. So if a person has like significant pain and they have food sensitivities and it's not resolving, maybe none of the doctors actually asked them about food sensitivities. They only asked them about their knee pain or their back pain, and they're really focused on that area. They're getting adjusted or they're getting PT, but nobody's really talking to them about this like food issue that they're having, right? And so they may actually get a cortisone shot and they feel amazing, okay? And why would they feel amazing with the cortisone shot? Because it's a steroid, okay? And it lowers inflammation due to the immune system. The problem with doing that potentially is that now the mechanical issue might still be there if they have one. And so they're moving around, they're doing their thing, they're being active, and the inflammation is no longer signaling to them that there's a problem. So they go and they basically now injure themselves, but their body doesn't have the inflammatory signal to make them aware of it. So when the cortisone shot wears off, now it comes back with a vengeance. And so the strategy then is to do another cortisone shot often, and then it doesn't work quite as good, or if it does, it doesn't work as long. And then eventually they try a third cortisone shot. Usually that doesn't work at all. And what's going on at that point is that that type of steroidal anti-inflammatory is now not working because the body has become desensitized to that approach. Basically, it's resistant to that, even though there's inflammation still. So At that point, now they're sitting there, they're inflamed, they are in pain, they may have some mechanical things that are going on, they may have like a bone-on-bone issue going on, but now that bone-on-bone issue is inflamed again. And so at some point we need to get in there and determine, okay, well, what's driving this inflammation? So the gist of what I'm presenting this weekend is that there are specific foods that actually cross-react with joints. So remember that video I did a few days ago about how viruses can cross-react with human tissue? Did you know that food can do that as well? Like we talk about food doing that, like gluten, that's a big one. It can cross-react with the small intestine or the brain or the cerebellum. And so a lot of people with autoimmunity that have like dizziness or blood sugar issues or digestive issues, actually it's like an autoimmune issue, it's not a food sensitivity. Well, the same thing can happen with joint tissue. So there's certain foods out there like dairy, like gluten and like pork that can have a tendency to, if we eat those things, if we don't break them down all the way in the stomach, they go into the small intestine. Our immune system identifies them as a threat, but then it mistakenly identifies joint tissue as the same thing. And so those foods can trigger an inflammatory reaction to our own body. Okay? And so the answer to that, the quick answer would be, well, then just stop eating pork, dairy, and gluten, right? And so, yeah, there's definitely some value to that, but that's the trap of having food sensitivities is like, okay, avoid the foods. Okay, but what if you're reactive to everything? That becomes a strategy that doesn't work. And then the other thing is, what if the immunological imbalance that contributed to that isn't resolved? So now this person's reacting to pork, or they're reacting to dairy, they're reacting to gluten. They think it's joint tissue. They take away the gluten, they take away the pork, and they take away the dairy, but they still have joints. So what happens? They still react to their joints, and now they have chronic inflammation that's targeting their joints, and they can't really take joints out of their diet, right? They can't take the joints out of their body. So now they have a chronic inflammatory reaction, and they may start abuse like pain medicine to try to get this under control. So when anti-inflammatories don't work, either non-steroidal in the form of aspirin, ibuprofen, and when steroids don't work as an anti-inflammatory, then people turn to things like opioids. Right? And opioids, they don't really stop the inflammation, they just make you not care. That's how they work. So it's a neurological blocking of the pain, basically. That's why they're highly addictive and they can create other problems. So the question is, all right, so I have pain, it's insidious onset or it's chronic and unresolved, and I have a food sensitivity, and I don't want to just avoid the food. So what are some other things that can contribute to an unresolved food sensitivity? Because maybe you've already tried a leaky gut protocol, or you've already tried removing the foods, you've already tried taking probiotics, and maybe they didn't help you or they made you worse. And so like, how do you actually ferret out what's driving this chronic leaky gut issue that's driving this food sensitivity that's now driving chronic pain that's unresolved in the orthopedic model, right? Well, there's a few things to consider, and so I can go into them in a little more detail in subsequent videos, but there's a cortisol issue. Okay, so you start looking at hormones basically, and cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone that our adrenals release. Thyroid could be related to this. There's primary hypothyroidism, and then there's like 23 patterns of functional thyroid disturbances. And if you're having chronic thyroid issues and you've been told your lab tests are normal, so like if you're depressed and you have cold hands and feet, or constipated, can't lose weight, check out some of our videos on this page about thyroid function. And then sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, can play a big role in unresolved food sensitivity that could be driving chronic inflammation that could be leading you to have an unresolved pain phenomenon. So that's a little bit about a conversation that you can get going with your doctor about having unresolved pain, maybe doing some investigation into food sensitivities and the mechanisms specific to you that's driving them could be useful. And anyway, hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you another time here. Cheers.